The explosion shattered the morning silence like thunder breaking through a peaceful dream. Marines scattered across the dusty compound as debris rained down from the damaged building. Through the chaos and screaming, Navy SEAL medic Jake Martinez spotted her immediately. A young woman sat motionless against a concrete wall, her dark hair matted with dust and blood, staring straight ahead with vacant eyes. Jake had seen that look before. The 1,000-yard stare. The silent shock that followed trauma so severe the mind simply shut down to protect itself. He grabbed his medical kit and rushed toward her, his boots crunching over broken glass and scattered concrete. "Ma'am, I'm a medic. Can you hear me?" Jake knelt beside her, quickly scanning for visible injuries. Blood seeped through her torn shirt sleeve, and a nasty gash ran across her forehead. But it was her complete stillness that worried him most. She hadn't even flinched when he approached. The woman's eyes remained fixed on some distant point beyond the chaos around them. She appeared to be in her mid-20s, with delicate features that spoke of a life far removed from this war-torn landscape. Jake noticed her clothes were civilian, not military issue. A translator perhaps, or maybe a humanitarian worker caught in the wrong place at the worst possible time. "I need to check your injuries," Jake said gently, his voice calm despite the ongoing commotion around them. Soldiers shouted orders while medics tended to other wounded. The acrid smell of smoke and gunpowder filled the air, but the woman showed no reaction to any of it. Jake began his assessment methodically. The arm wound was deep, but not life-threatening. The head injury looked worse than it probably was, as head wounds always bled heavily. Her pulse was steady, breathing normal. Physically, she would survive. But the psychological damage was harder to measure. As he cleaned and bandaged her wounds, Jake found himself studying her face. There was something about her that seemed familiar, though he was certain they had never met. Perhaps it was the way she held herself, even in her catatonic state. There was a dignity there, a strength that trauma had temporarily buried, but not destroyed. "We're going to get you out of here," Jake promised, though he wasn't sure she could hear him. He had treated hundreds of wounded soldiers and civilians during his 3 tours of duty, but something about this woman pulled at him in a way he couldn't explain. Maybe it was her age, close to his own 28 years. Maybe it was the wedding ring on her finger that made him think of the family she might be worrying about her. The evacuation helicopter arrived within minutes, its rotors whipping up clouds of dust that stung exposed skin. Jake carefully lifted the woman, surprised by how light she felt in his arms. She offered no resistance, remaining as limp and unresponsive as a rag doll. Other wounded were loaded onto stretchers, but Jake kept her close, unwilling to let her disappear into the military medical system where she might become just another case number. During the flight to the field hospital, Jake continued monitoring her vital signs. Her physical condition remained stable, but her psychological state showed no improvement. She stared at the helicopter's ceiling with the same empty expression, seemingly unaware that she had been moved at all. The field hospital bustled with activity as medical teams worked to save lives and ease suffering. Jake helped transfer his patient to a bed in the trauma ward, where she would receive proper medical attention. As he prepared to leave and return to duty, something made him pause. Call it instinct, call it professional curiosity, or call it something deeper he wasn't ready to acknowledge. "What's her story?" Jake asked the attending physician, Dr. Sarah Chen, a veteran Army surgeon who had seen her share of trauma cases. Dr. Chen glanced at the woman's chart. "No identification found. We're calling her Jane Doe for now. Preliminary examination shows she suffered significant psychological trauma in addition to her physical injuries. Could be days or weeks before she responds to anyone." Jake nodded, understanding the medical reality but feeling frustrated by the helplessness of the situation. In his line of work, he was used to fixing things. Bandage the wound, stop the bleeding, stabilize the patient. But the human mind didn't always cooperate with such straightforward solutions. As he walked away, Jake found himself glancing back at the woman who lay so still and silent. Something about her case nagged at him, though he couldn't pinpoint exactly what. He had a feeling their paths would cross again, and next time, he hoped she would be ready to tell him who she really was. 3 days passed before Jake found time to return to the field hospital. His SEAL team had been deployed on back-to-back missions, and exhaustion weighed heavily on his shoulders. But between briefings and equipment checks, his thoughts kept drifting to the mysterious woman he had pulled from the rubble. Dr. Chen looked up from her clipboard as Jake approached the trauma ward. "Still no improvement," she said before he could ask. "She takes food and water when offered, follows basic instructions like sitting up or lying down, but no verbal responses. We've run every test we can think of. Physically, she's healing well. Mentally..." She shrugged helplessly. Jake found the woman exactly where he had left her, sitting upright in bed and staring out the small window at the desert landscape beyond. Someone had washed her hair and given her clean hospital clothes, revealing just how young she really was. Without the dust and blood, she looked almost fragile, yet there was still that underlying strength he had sensed before. "Mind if I sit?" Jake asked, pulling up a chair without waiting for an answer he knew wouldn't come. He settled beside her bed, following her gaze out the window. Nice view of absolutely nothing out there. Kind of peaceful, actually. For the next hour, Jake simply sat with her, occasionally sharing stories about his hometown in Texas, his family, or funny incidents from his military training. He told her about his sister's wedding the previous summer, about his mother's terrible cooking that somehow always tasted amazing anyway, about the time he accidentally dyed all his white socks pink in the laundry. The woman's expression never changed, but Jake thought he detected a slight shift in her posture, as if she might actually be listening. Encouraged, he continued talking, sharing memories and observations with the easy confidence of someone accustomed to working under pressure. On his fourth visit, Jake brought a small radio he had borrowed from another soldier. "Thought you might like some music," he explained, tuning to a station that played classical pieces. The soft melody of a violin concerto filled the small space around her bed. That's when it happened. So subtle he almost missed it, but unmistakable once he noticed. The woman's fingers began moving against the blanket, not randomly but with purpose and rhythm. She was conducting the music, her hand following the rise and fall of the melody with practiced precision. "You're a musician," Jake said softly, and for the first time since he had found her, the woman's eyes moved. They shifted from the window to his face just for a moment, before returning to their distant focus. But it was progress, real measurable progress. Jake leaned forward, careful not to seem threatening or overly eager. "What do you play? Piano, violin, guitar maybe?" Each question was met with silence, but he sensed an awareness that hadn't been there before. The next day, Jake arrived with sheet music he had managed to acquire from a chaplain who played organ for chapel services. Classical pieces, some popular songs, even a few folk tunes from various countries. He spread them across the bedside table like a buffet of musical possibilities. The woman's eyes immediately went to the papers, scanning them with obvious recognition. Her fingers moved again, this time more deliberately as if she were playing invisible keys in the air. Jake watched, fascinated, as color gradually returned to her cheeks and her breathing deepened. "Chopin?" Jake guessed, pointing to one of the classical pieces. The woman's head turned slightly toward him, not quite making eye contact but acknowledging his presence in a way she hadn't before. "My grandmother loved Chopin," Jake continued, settling into what was becoming their routine. "She had this old upright piano in her living room. Probably hadn't been tuned in 20 years, but she played it every evening after dinner. Drove my grandfather crazy because he couldn't hear the television over the music. But when she died, he couldn't stand the silence. Said the house felt empty without her songs filling it up." This time, the woman's response was unmistakable. A single tear rolled down her cheek, leaving a glistening trail before disappearing into the hospital blanket. It was the first emotion she had shown since Jake found her, and it hit him harder than he expected. "Hey," he said gently, reaching for a tissue from the bedside table. "It's okay to cry. Sometimes that's the only way the hurt can get out." The woman accepted the tissue but still didn't speak. However, when Jake prepared to leave that evening, she did something that made his heart skip. She touched his hand. Just briefly, just the lightest pressure of her fingertips against his wrist. But it was intentional, purposeful communication. That night, Jake lay in his bunk staring at the ceiling, unable to stop thinking about the mysterious woman who was slowly finding her way back from wherever trauma had taken her. He had no idea who she was or what had happened to her before the explosion. but he was beginning to understand that helping her heal was becoming more important to him than any mission he had ever undertaken. The breakthrough came on a Thursday morning when Jake least expected it. He had arrived at the field hospital carrying a thermos of real coffee, a luxury he had traded for with a supply sergeant who owed him a favor. The woman sat in her usual position by the window, but today something was different. Her hands rested on her lap holding a piece of paper. "Good morning," Jake said, settling into his familiar chair. "I brought coffee today. Figured we could both use something stronger than hospital cafeteria brew." The woman turned her head toward him, and for the first time in 2 weeks, she made direct eye contact. Her brown eyes, clear and intelligent, studied his face with an intensity that made him feel suddenly self-conscious. "You've been very kind," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, accented with something European that Jake couldn't quite place. "I wanted to thank you." Jake nearly dropped his coffee. After days of one-sided conversations, hearing her speak felt like witnessing a miracle. "You're welcome," he managed, trying to keep the excitement out of his voice. "How are you feeling?" "Confused," she admitted, looking down at the paper in her hands. "The doctors explained what happened about the explosion and my injuries. But there are gaps in my memory. Things I should remember but cannot." Jake set down his coffee and leaned forward slightly. "That's normal after trauma. Sometimes the mind protects us by blocking out painful memories until we're strong enough to handle them." The woman nodded slowly. "My name is Elena Kozlov. I was working as a translator for an aid organization when the bombing occurred. I remember arriving at the compound that morning, but everything after that is darkness until I woke up here." "Elena," Jake repeated, testing the name. It suited her somehow, elegant and strong at the same time. "I'm Jake Martinez. I was the medic who found you after the explosion." "I know," Elena said, surprising him. "I remember your voice. Even when I couldn't respond, I heard you talking to me. Your stories about home, about your family, they kept me anchored when everything else felt like it was floating away." A warmth spread through Jake's chest at her words. "I wasn't sure you could hear me. I felt pretty foolish sometimes talking to myself." "You weren't talking to yourself," Elena assured him. "You were talking to someone who desperately needed to remember that the world contained more than violence and pain. Your grandmother's piano music, your sister's wedding, your mother's pink socks. These stories reminded me that beauty and love still existed somewhere." Jake laughed, remembering his laundry disaster tale. "I can't believe that ridiculous story actually helped." "It did," Elena said simply. "It helped me remember that life is full of small, ordinary moments that matter more than we realize." I had forgotten that truth. Over the next hour, Elena shared fragments of her own story. She had been born in Prague, had studied music and languages at university, and had come to this war-torn region to help coordinate aid efforts for displaced families. Her husband, a doctor, had been killed in a car accident 2 years earlier, which had motivated her to dedicate her life to helping others who had lost everything. "I understand now why you recognize the music," Jake said when she finished. "You have a gift for it." Elena's fingers unconsciously moved against the bedsheet as if playing piano keys. "I taught piano lessons to children in Prague before I came here. Music was always my first language, even before Czech or English. When I lost my words after the explosion, I thought I had lost everything that made me who I am." "But you didn't lose it," Jake pointed out. "It was still there, waiting for you to find it again." Elena looked at him with something that might have been the beginning of a smile. "Yes, thanks to a stubborn SEAL medic who refused to let me disappear completely." Dr. Chen appeared in the doorway, clipboard in hand, and an expression of amazement on her face. "I heard voices and had to come see for myself. This is remarkable progress, Elena. How do you feel?" "Like I'm waking up from a very long dream," Elena replied. "Some parts are still unclear, but the important things are coming back." Dr. Chen made notes on her chart. "We'll want to run some cognitive tests, but based on what I've observed, you're well on your way to a full recovery. It's quite extraordinary, really. Cases like yours usually take months of intensive therapy." Jake felt a mixture of pride and something deeper that he wasn't ready to examine too closely. "Elena's stronger than she looks," he said. "That may be true," Dr. Chen agreed, "but recovery doesn't happen in isolation. Having someone who cared enough to sit with her every day, to talk to her and treat her like a person instead of a patient, that made all the difference." After Dr. Chen left, Elena and Jake sat in comfortable silence for a while. processing the magnitude of what had just occurred. The woman who had been lost in trauma's fog was finding her way back to the world, and somehow Jake had played a part in her journey. "What happens now?" Jake asked eventually. Elena considered the question carefully. "I suppose I should contact my organization, arrange for transport back to Prague, resume my life somehow. Is that what you want?" Elena looked out the window at the desert landscape that had become familiar over the past weeks. "I'm not sure what I want anymore. Everything I thought I knew about my life changed the morning of that explosion. I need time to figure out who I am now." Jake understood exactly what she meant. Military service had taught him that traumatic experiences didn't just heal and disappear. They became part of who you were, shaping your perspective and priorities in ways both obvious and subtle. Elena would never be quite the same person she had been before the bombing, but maybe that wasn't entirely a bad thing. As Elena's physical and mental recovery accelerated, so did Jake's feelings for her. He found himself looking forward to their daily conversations more than anything else in his routine. She had a way of listening that made even his most mundane stories seem interesting, and her insights into life, music, and human nature revealed a depth of character that drew him in completely. "Tell me about your missions," Elena asked one afternoon, as they shared lunch in the hospital courtyard. She had been cleared for limited mobility, and the desert sunshine brought welcome color back to her pale cheeks. Jake hesitated. He wasn't accustomed to discussing his work with civilians, especially operations that involved classified details. "It's not really something I can talk about in specifics," he said carefully. "I don't need specifics," Elena assured him. "I'm curious about why you chose this life. Most medics I've met are motivated by a desire to heal people, but SEALs are trained primarily for combat. Those seem like conflicting purposes." Jake had never really examined his motivations that deeply, but Elena's question made him think. "I suppose I wanted to be in a position where I could make a real difference," he said slowly. "Regular medics save lives, which is incredible and important work. But SEAL medics save lives in places where nobody else can reach. We go into situations where people have given up hope of rescue. Like you did with me," Elena observed. "That wasn't a rescue mission," Jake pointed out. "That was just being in the right place at the right time." Elena smiled, the first full smile he had seen from her. It transformed her entire face, revealing the vibrant woman who had been hidden beneath layers of trauma. "Perhaps you were exactly where you were supposed to be when I needed someone most." Their conversations began to shift from the general to the personal. Elena shared memories of her husband David, a humanitarian doctor who had been working in refugee camps when his life was cut short. She spoke of her guilt at surviving when he hadn't, her struggle to find meaning after his death, and her decision to continue their shared mission of helping others. "I thought if I could save enough lives, help enough people, maybe it would balance the scales somehow," Elena explained, as if good deeds could bring him back or at least make his death mean something more. Jake understood that kind of thinking. He had seen soldiers struggle with survivor's guilt, the crushing weight of being alive when others weren't. "Did it work?" he asked gently. Elena considered the question. "No, I learned that you can't negotiate with grief. It doesn't work like a transaction where enough good behavior earns you peace. Healing has to come from accepting what happened, not trying to undo it." "Is that what you've been doing here? Learning to accept what happened?" "Among other things," Elena said, her eyes meeting his with an intensity that made his pulse quicken. "I've also been learning that life continues to offer unexpected gifts, even after terrible losses. Sometimes, especially after terrible losses when we've stopped expecting anything good to happen." Jake felt heat rise in his cheeks. Was she talking about him? About whatever was growing between them during these afternoon conversations? He wanted to ask, but found himself afraid of the answer. Dr. Chen interrupted his internal debate by approaching their table with Elena's latest test results. "All your cognitive functions are testing within normal ranges," she announced. "Physically, you're cleared for discharge whenever you feel ready. The aid organization has arranged for your transport back to Prague next week if that's still your plan." Elena's smile faded slightly. "Next week," she repeated, as if testing how the words felt. After Dr. Chen left, Jake and Elena sat in silence, both processing the implications of her impending departure. Jake felt a hollow sensation in his chest at the thought of her leaving. Over the past weeks, she had become the best part of his deployment, the reason he looked forward to each new day. Will you go back to Prague? Jake asked finally. I don't know, Elena admitted. My apartment there feels like it belongs to a different person now. The woman who lived there was stuck in the past, trying to honor a dead man by denying her own right to happiness. I'm not sure I want to be that woman anymore. What would you want to be instead? Elena looked at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Someone brave enough to embrace whatever comes next. Someone willing to take risks for the possibility of genuine connection with another person. Jake's heart began beating faster. Unless he was completely misreading the situation, Elena was telling him that she felt the same pull he did, the same sense that something profound had developed between them during her recovery. Elena, he began, then stopped, unsure how to proceed. His training had prepared him for combat, for medical emergencies, for life-or-death situations, but not for navigating the delicate territory of falling for someone he had rescued. Yes? She prompted, her voice soft but encouraging. I know the timing is complicated and our situations are far from ideal, but I need you to know that these weeks with you have meant everything to me. You've changed how I see the world, how I understand what really matters in life. Elena reached across the table and took his hand. Jake, I need to tell you something important. Something that changes everything about my situation here. The serious tone of her voice sent a chill through him. What is it? Elena took a deep breath, as if preparing herself for a revelation that would alter the course of their relationship forever. Before I tell you, I need you to promise me something. Promise me that whatever I say next, you'll let me finish explaining before you react. Jake nodded, though anxiety was building in his chest. I promise. Elena gripped Jake's hand tighter, her knuckles white with tension. I wasn't completely honest about why I came to this region, she began, her voice barely audible above the distant sounds of the hospital. Yes, I was working with the aid organization, and yes, I wanted to help people. But there was another reason, a more personal one. Jake felt his stomach drop, sensing that whatever Elena was about to reveal would fundamentally change everything between them. He forced himself to remain silent, remembering his promise to let her finish. My husband David didn't die in a car accident, Elena continued, tears beginning to form in her eyes. He was murdered. Assassinated by a criminal organization that was stealing medical supplies meant for refugee camps. David discovered their operation and was preparing to expose them when they killed him. The words hit Jake like a physical blow. Everything he thought he knew about Elena's story was crumbling around him. Elena, what are you saying? I came here hunting the man who ordered my husband's death, she said, her voice gaining strength as she spoke. I spent 2 years learning everything I could about his organization, his operations, his associates. The aid work was real, but it was also my cover. I was gathering intelligence, building relationships, waiting for the right opportunity to get close enough to him. Jake stared at her, trying to process this revelation. The gentle, traumatized translator he had rescued was actually someone entirely different, someone who had been pursuing a dangerous vendetta across international borders. Who is he? The man you're after? Viktor Petrov. He runs weapons and medical supply theft throughout this region. The compound where you found me, that wasn't a random bombing. I had finally gotten close enough to his operation to gather the evidence I needed to destroy him. But someone warned him, and the explosion was meant to eliminate me before I could act. Jake's mind raced, connecting pieces of information he hadn't understood before. The way you were positioned when I found you against that wall. You weren't just a victim caught in the blast. You were there intentionally. Elena nodded. I had planted surveillance equipment in the building the night before. I was there to retrieve it when the bomb went off. I was lucky to survive. Luckier still that you found me before Petrov's people came back to make sure I was dead. Why are you telling me this now? Jake asked, though part of him already knew the answer. Because Petrov is still out there and I'm not done with him, Elena said firmly. The doctors think I'm ready to leave, but I'm not going back to Prague. I'm going to finish what I started. Jake felt a cold fear settle in his chest. Elena, you can't be serious. You nearly died already. This man clearly has resources and connections that make him extremely dangerous. Going after him alone is suicide. I won't be going alone, Elena said quietly. That's what I need to ask you, Jake. I need your help. The request hung in the air between them like an unexploded bomb. Jake stared at Elena, seeing her clearly for the first time. The strength he had sensed beneath her trauma, the intelligence behind her careful questions about his work, the way she had recovered so remarkably quickly once she regained her voice. None of it had been coincidence. You've been planning this from the beginning, haven't you? Jake realized. Getting close to me, learning about my background, my skills. Was any of it real? Elena's face crumpled with genuine pain. Everything between us has been real, Jake. I never expected to fall in love with you. I never expected to find someone who could make me want something more than revenge. But I can't pretend that isn't part of why I'm telling you this now. Love. She had said the word that Jake hadn't dared to think, let alone speak. But now it was poisoned by the knowledge that their entire relationship had been built on deception. You manipulated me, Jake said, pulling his hand away from hers. You used my feelings for you to recruit me for your personal vendetta. No, Elena said desperately. That's not how it happened. Yes, I initially thought you might be useful. A SEAL medic with your training and experience would be valuable in going after Petrov. But Jake, I fell in love with you completely independently of that. These feelings, this connection between us, it's not part of any plan. Jake stood up from the table, needing distance to think clearly. Everything Elena had told him about her life, her motivations, her recovery, had been carefully crafted to present a specific image. How much of the woman he had fallen for even existed? What exactly are you asking me to do? He said finally. Elena wiped tears from her cheeks before answering. Petrov operates from a compound about 50 miles north of here. It's heavily guarded, almost impossible to approach without military training. I have intelligence about his schedule, his security measures, his weaknesses. With your help, we could get in, gather enough evidence to bring down his entire organization and make sure he faces justice for David's murder and all the other lives he's destroyed. And if we get caught, if we get killed, then at least we tried, Elena said simply. Jake, I understand if you feel betrayed. I understand if you never want to see me again. But I had to ask. I had to give you the choice to help me finish this. Jake looked at Elena, really looked at her, trying to separate the woman he had fallen for from the calculating avenger she had just revealed herself to be. The truth was, both versions existed in the same person. The gentle, broken translator and the determined hunter of justice were equally real parts of who Elena was. I need time to think, Jake said finally. Elena nodded, though he could see the disappointment in her eyes. Of course. But Jake, there's one more thing you should know. Petrov knows I survived the bombing. My sources tell me he's planning to leave the region soon, disappearing to somewhere we'll never find him. If we're going to act, it has to be within the next few days. As Jake walked away from their table, his mind churned with impossible choices. Everything he thought he knew about his feelings, about Elena, about their future together had been thrown into question. But beneath his sense of betrayal, a part of him understood exactly why she had done what she did. Love and justice weren't always incompatible, even when they led down dangerous paths. Jake spent the entire night walking the perimeter of the base, wrestling with Elena's revelation and her impossible request. By dawn, he had come to a decision that surprised even him. He found Elena sitting in the hospital chapel, her hands folded in prayer, looking smaller and more vulnerable than he had ever seen her. I have an answer for you, Jake said quietly, sliding into the pew beside her. Elena looked up, her eyes red from crying. Before you say anything, I want you to know that I understand why you can't help me. What I asked was unfair and dangerous and— Yes, Jake interrupted. Elena blinked in confusion. What? Yes, I'll help you, Jake said clearly. But not for the reasons you think and not in the way you're expecting. Elena stared at him as if she couldn't quite believe what she was hearing. Jake, you don't understand what you're saying. This isn't a military operation with rules of engagement and backup support. This is personal vengeance in a foreign country where we have no legal authority. I understand exactly what it is, Jake replied calmly. And I'm still saying yes, but with conditions. Elena leaned forward, hope and confusion warring in her expression. What conditions? Jake took her hands in his, noting how they trembled slightly. First, we do this legally. No vigilante justice, no personal revenge mission. We gather evidence and turn it over to the proper authorities who can prosecute Petrov through official channels. Jake, you don't understand how these things work here. Official channels are corrupted by bribes and threats. Justice through the legal system is nearly impossible. Then we make it possible, Jake said firmly. I have contacts in military intelligence who can ensure the evidence reaches people who can't be bought or intimidated. We build a case that's so solid and so public that Petrov can't escape justice through corruption. Elena considered this. clearly struggling between her desire for immediate revenge and the logic of Jake's approach. "What's the second condition?" "We do this together or not at all," Jake said. "No more lies, no more manipulation, no more hidden agendas. If we're going to risk our lives, we do it as partners who trust each other completely." Tears began flowing down Elena's cheeks again.
"Why are you willing to help me?"
"After everything I've done, all the ways I've deceived you?" Jake had been asking himself the same question all night. "Because I understand why you did it," he said finally. "You lost the person you loved most in the world, and you've spent 2 years living with the knowledge that his killer is walking free. I can't imagine that kind of pain, that kind of frustration with the system that failed to protect someone you loved. But that doesn't excuse what I did to you." "No, it doesn't," Jake agreed. "You manipulated my feelings and put me in an impossible position. But Elena, underneath all the deception and planning, I saw who you really are. You're someone who fights for justice even when it costs you everything. You're someone who refuses to let evil people destroy lives without consequences. I may not agree with your methods, but I respect your motivations." Elena shook her head slowly. "You're a better person than I am, Jake. I was so consumed with hatred and revenge that I was willing to use anyone, hurt anyone, to get what I wanted." "That's not who you are anymore," Jake pointed out. "The woman who's been sitting here praying, the woman who told me the truth even though she knew it might cost her everything. That's who you really are. The revenge was just grief wearing a different mask." Elena was quiet for a long moment, processing everything Jake had said. "If we do this your way, legally and properly, there's no guarantee Petrov will face justice. He might escape, disappear, never be held accountable for David's death." "That's true," Jake acknowledged. "But if we do it your way, we might get killed and then nobody brings him to justice. At least this way, we have a chance to stop him without destroying ourselves in the process." Elena looked around the simple chapel, her eyes settling on a wooden cross mounted on the wall behind the altar. "David always said that justice and revenge weren't the same thing. He believed that how you pursued justice mattered as much as whether you achieved it." "Sounds like a wise man." "He was," Elena said softly. "He would have liked you, I think. He would have approved of someone who could talk his stubborn wife out of a suicide mission." Jake smiled at that. "So is that a yes to my conditions?" Elena turned to face him fully, and for the first time since her revelation, Jake saw the woman he had fallen in love with looking back at him. "Yes, we do this legally, properly, and together. But Jake, I need you to know something else. Even if we succeed, even if Petrov goes to prison for the rest of his life, I may never be completely free of this darkness. Grief and anger change you in ways that don't just disappear." "I know," Jake said, "but you don't have to carry that darkness alone anymore." Elena leaned against him, resting her head on his shoulder. "What happens after? If we survive this, if we actually manage to bring him to justice, what happens to us?" Jake considered the question carefully. "I honestly don't know," he admitted. "This whole situation is complicated in ways I never could have imagined. But Elena, whatever happens between us, whatever our relationship becomes, I want it to be built on truth from here forward. No more secrets, no more hidden agendas." "No more secrets," Elena agreed. "Even the ones that might hurt, especially those ones." Elena lifted her head to look at him. "In that case, there's one more thing you should know before we begin planning this operation." Jake felt a flicker of anxiety. "What now?" "I think I'm falling in love with you too," Elena said with a small smile. "And unlike everything else I've told you, that's been true from the very beginning." Jake felt the knot of tension in his chest finally begin to loosen. Whatever challenges lay ahead of them, whatever dangers they would face in pursuing justice for David's murder, they would face them together, and maybe, if they were very lucky and very careful, they would both survive to build something real and lasting from the ashes of Elena's quest for vengeance. "Well," Jake said, returning her smile, "that's definitely the most surprising answer you could have given me."